So what is the most important component of a race car? You might be surprised to hear that it's actually your tires. Your tires are what connect every other component of the car to the ground. So, without further ado, let's talk tires. There's a lot more to tires than you may think. And actually, there's a lot more to tires than what I can cover in one short video. We're going to go over some of the basics today to help you be as prepared as you can for your first, second, 10th, or 20th track day. To begin with, let's talk about treadwear. Treadwear is a number assigned to a tire compound by the manufacturer that essentially tells you how sticky that tire compound is. It also tells you how long that tire compound is going to last. So a higher treadwear is good for street cars because it's going to last. If you're driving a car 15,000 miles a year, you don't want a treadwear tire that's going to wear out in 5,000 miles. But if you're running your car on track, you don't want a treadwear tire that's going to have no grip. For a street car, you'll often see tires labeled as ultra high performance. These are usually around 300 to 320 treadwear. These tires are great for the street because they give you a good amount of performance, but they still give you grip in the rain, so you're not in danger on a rainy road. If you occasionally track your car or you're looking for something on the street that gives you a little more performance, you can up it to a 200 treadwear tire. This tire is a little slicker in the rain, so just use caution if you find yourself caught in a storm. These tires are also decent on track and are a good beginner tire along with a 300 treadwear tire. If you're doing your first track day, I actually personally recommend that you don't start on a really advanced R-comp or slick tire. That's because these super sticky tires are going to hide all of your mistakes. And instead of you becoming a better driver by seeing where you're messing up, you're just going to think that you're doing everything perfectly. And it's okay to make mistakes. That's where you learn. So after you've done a couple track days and you feel like you are outperforming your tires, that's where we can start getting into what we call R-comp tires. These tires are DOT approved track and competition tires. So they have a treadwear rating. Usually they are below 200. These R-compound tires with treadwear ratings under 200 really aren't that safe for use on the street. So if you're gonna run them on the track, I recommend that you have a separate set of track wheels and you swap them on trackside. They're okay in the dry, but they have less grip in the wet. So you might run into hydroplaning issues if you hit a puddle while you're on the highway, and no one wants that. Our compound tires are great for someone who autocrosses a lot, tracks frequently, or races. I actually run our compound tires on both of my race cars. In the dry, I run a 40 treadwear, and in the wet, I run a 100 treadwear. That brings us to another topic, the tires that we run in the dry versus in the wet. You always want to run a tire with a little bit more tread in the wet because the tires that I run in the dry have very little tread and are not going to give me any grip in the wet. I've tried. It's not much fun. Now there are tires that are not DOT approved and therefore do not have a treadwear rating. These tires are called slicks, just a general name for race tires. And these tires are not street legal, nor are they safe to use on the street. These are the tires that you'll see donned by Formula One cars, IMSA cars, and most of the professional race series. These tires have no tread. Now they do make wet slicks. These tires are not DOT approved, but they do have a little bit of tread. The interesting thing about rain slicks is that they actually don't do very well in the dry. They have a tendency to overheat and chunk, where big bits of tire actually fall off. For this reason, if you find yourself driving on track on a pair of rain slicks, be very careful that you don't let the tires overheat and that you come off track if the track starts drying out. So you want to make sure that you pay attention to the treadwear of the tires that you're buying. You want to make sure that you're buying a compound that is suitable for you at your skill level. If you're a beginner driver, make sure you're sticking to something closer to a 200 to 300 treadwear tire for your first track day. If you're ready to advance, start looking at something around a 100. And if you're about to get into racing, maybe it's time to break into something sub 100. Now we can start getting into the components of tires that you can actually control. Perhaps the most important of these is pressure. Your tire pressures are incredibly important in how your car handles on track. We're not going to get too far into the physics of this, but when you take a corner, you do want your tire to actually roll a little bit. You don't want it to be stiff. That roll is caused by a little bit of decrease in pressure from the potential max pressure that that tire could hold. And that roll is going to give those tires a little bit more grip. But you want to make sure you have the right amount. You don't want to be rolling too far onto the sidewall or that vertical section of tire. So how do you find that sweet spot of pressure on your own car? That's a hard question, and that's something that even us racers play with, not even just day to day, but session to session on track. To begin, look at what the manufacturer of your car recommends. Open your driver's side door and look at the panel on the inside of the door. This is going to give you what the manufacturer tells you to run your tires at on the street. But wait, don't set your tire pressures to that. That is a cold pressure. Your tires on the street never actually reach high temperatures because you're not cornering hard. Take that pressure and take out maybe 2 to 3 psi to begin with. Now, if you're running the stock tires on the car, this may be enough. But if you're running tires that are different treadwear from the stock tire on the car, you might actually need to lower the pressure more. Usually, a lower treadwear tire means that it can withstand and actually prefers a lower pressure. So for example, on my 40 treadwear tires, I'm going to run a lower pressure than I would on my 300 treadwear tires. When you're measuring pressures on your car, make sure you are always measuring the baseline pressure when the tires are cold, so before you've gone on track. But you do want to get a hot pressure as well. So the second you get off track, get out of your car, pull out your tire gauge, and get some hot pressures. Compare these hot pressures to the cold pressures. Ideally, you should gain about 6 to 8 psi. If you've gained more or less than this, then you need to adjust your pressures a little bit. If you've gained less than 6 to 8 psi, chances are you're actually just not using the entire potential of the tire. But if you find that you're gaining more than 8 psi, it's likely that you're running too low or too high of a pressure. How do you know if it was too low or too high? Well, tire manufacturers make that easy for us. You'll find little marks on the side of your tire. Most manufacturers, it's a little triangle. You want the wear of your tire to roll just to the tip of that triangle. If you've gone past the tip of the triangle, your pressure's too low and you need to add a couple psi. If you're not at it yet, then lower your pressures. You always want to make sure that you're letting air out of your tires when they're cold. If you let air out of your tires when they're hot, you're going to find that your baseline cold reading is actually different than what you expected because the density of air changes with temperature. So if you need to let air out of your tires, let them cool off and then let the air out. You also want to make sure that you're checking your pressures before every session on track, especially on days when the temperature changes a lot between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. You'll find that as the ambient air temperature increases, so does your tire pressure. So you're actually going to be bleeding off air as the day goes on. Now, tire pressures can give us other tricky bits of advice too. You can look at how the pressure is building differently between the four corners of your car to give you clues on how your car is set up or maybe on how you're driving. Let's take a track like Roebling Road Raceway in Savannah, Georgia, for example. This track has mostly right-hand turns, 7 right-handers to only 2 left-handers. If I set my car up evenly on all 4 corners, I'm going to notice that I'm building more pressure on the left side of my car because that car is doing more work. In this case, before I go on track, I'm actually going to drop the left side of my car lower than the right so that all 4 tires are approximately the same when I come off track and they're hot. Now, this is a simple example, but if we notice changes like that on a track that maybe has the same number of left and right hand turns, this might mean that something's up with how we're driving or the setup of our car. We can also use tire pressures to help balance issues with our car, such as oversteer or understeer. This is a little tricky, and you have to be very cautious and reduce the pressures by minimal amounts when you're doing this. For example, if you notice that the car is oversteering, meaning that the rear end of the car has less grip than the front end of the car, you want to increase that grip in the rear of the car. One way that you can do that is by dropping the pressures just a little bit. Now, that's not to say that pressure is the only way you can control these changes in your car. If you notice that your car has significant oversteer or understeer issues, it's probably a good idea to look at your suspension, take it to a shop, and have it set up. But if you're at the track and you're trying to manage these things on the fly, pressure is a good way to do it. The temperature of your tires goes hand in hand with the pressure. We already talked about temperature a little bit when we were talking about pressure. Every single tire is going to have a manufacturer recommended ideal operating temperature. For lower treadwear tires, this ideal operating temperature is going to be higher. Most importantly, this means that the tire is not going to perform as well when it's cold. Again, the tire will not perform as well when it's cold. I have seen many issues happen because people forget this. Remember, if you are running a low treadwear tire, you need to take a warm-up lap. That first lap out on track, do not drive 10/10ths. Let the tires warm up and then you can start to push it. Along with that though, it's possible to exceed that ideal operating temperature, especially on a really hot day. So as you get later in the session, you're gonna feel that the tires start to feel greasy, and again, you're gonna need to let off a little bit. It's totally normal. It doesn't mean that you're a bad driver. It doesn't mean that you're slower than other people out there. That's just how tires are. Just like pressure, temperature can tell us some interesting things about the setup of our car. If you have a digital thermometer, you can read the temperature on the outer shoulder, middle, and inner shoulder of the tire. This can give you clues about the camber of your car. If you find that the outer shoulder is building more temperature than everywhere else on the car, you need more camber. If you find that the inner shoulder is building more temperature, you probably need less camber. Ideally, you want the temperature across all three sections of the tire to be approximately even. If you're reading these temperatures across the tire and you see that the middle temperature is actually different from the side temperatures, you need to adjust your pressure. If the middle temperature is lower, your tire is essentially bowing up like this because you have too little pressure in your tire, so you need to increase the pressure so you can get that curve again at the bottom. So when you're at the track, make sure you're paying attention to these things. Like I said at the beginning, tires are important. We need to pay attention to our pressures and our temperatures when they're at the track to make sure that we're getting the most out of our cars. If your car makes 500 horsepower, 1,000 horsepower, it doesn't matter if your tires aren't able to transfer that power to the track. Now to finish off, I want to talk just a little bit about tire care. Tires are expensive. Slicks are even more expensive. The better the tire, the more expensive it gets usually. So we want to take care of them. We want to keep them lasting as long as physically possible. How do you do that? First and foremost, store them out of the elements. You don't want them sitting out in the rain and in the sun, especially that UV light can have very bad effects on the rubber of the tire, causing it to harden and lose a lot of its grip. As much as possible, you should try to keep the tires out of areas where there are temperature changes. So if you live in the north where it gets cold in winter, you probably don't want to keep your tires in your trailer where they'll be in 32-degree weather and then in 50-degree weather later in the day or in the summer. Always make sure you're monitoring the condition of your tires. Look at the tread depth and also look at the tread condition. You might have plenty of tread depth left, but you might have chunks taken out of your tire. You might be showing thread because you got your tire caught on, say, your fender. It actually happened to me. Check the wear of your tire from inside to outside. The outside of your tire might look fine, but if you crank your wheel all the way to the side and look at the inside, you might notice that cords are showing because of the camber you're running. Now we do want to try and keep our tires wearing as evenly as possible because we don't want to have to buy one tire before we have to buy the other three. In order to do this, make sure you're rotating your tires regularly if it's possible. If you're running a staggered setup, this might not be possible, just rotate left to right. But if you're running a square setup, rotate your tires cross, so left front to right rear and vice versa. If you're running a lot of camber, you can also flip your tire if they are not directional. This means that you can have your tire actually dismounted from the wheel and then mounted back on the wheel in the reverse direction. So what was on the inside is now on the outside. On cars with a lot of camber, this can help keep the inside and outside of the tire wearing evenly. Now, some tires are directional, meaning that they have a direction in which they need to run. These tires, unfortunately, cannot be flipped. When purchasing tires, and also when looking at old tires or tires that you may have had for a while, make sure you check the date code. Tires older than 2 years are not going to be in their peak performance. Once your tire gets over 5 years, it's probably a good time to get rid of it. You'll find the date code on the inner or outer sidewall of your tire. This little placard is going to end with a 2-digit code for the year. So if you see an 18, that means it was manufactured in 2018. The other digits correspond to the month and the day in which it was manufactured. If you have a car that sits for many months out of the year, it's a good idea to make sure that you're rotating the tires on the car, as in actually pushing the car forward about a quarter rotation every couple weeks or so. Passenger tires are made to be driven, so they tend to flat spot if they sit on the same spot for a while. If you're driving your car and you feel that the tires have flat spotted, it's okay, the flat spots will wear out. But if you know that your car is going to be sitting for a while, make sure that you're moving it every once in a while just to keep flat spots from forming. Like I said, that is nowhere near everything there is to know about tires. These components are incredibly important and there's so much to know, and there's always more to learn about them. You'll very likely find that you like different pressures than people next to you who might be running the exact same tire on the exact same car, and that's fine. You might like a different tire from someone else. You might prefer a different treadwear. That is fine. We all have our preferences in tires, but it's good to be familiar with tires and how they're labeled and how they work so that you can know what works best for you and for your car.